How we doing, folks? Welcome back to the Film and Literature Society.
Hello.
How you doing, Porto?
I'm doing great. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. Really looking forward to tonight's discussion. I think it's going to be a good time.
How's everyone in chat? Hello, guys.
Yeah, thanks for being here, everybody. Mel, Scott, Kiwi, how are you? Yeah, we were talking before we went live. What a powerful part of the book. I mean, it really amped up.
Yeah. This part of the book is, it's the meat of the book, as you said earlier. It really picks up the pace, and I'm kind of glad that we had I think the book wouldn't work as well without what we discussed last time. Mm-hmm. That sort of slow world building, but things get really intense real quick.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting seeing we picked like a pretty good spot to stop with the first section and then to move in, because it went from 0 to 100. I mean, it was like the first section we're just reading about the community, and we're reading about the life of the kids and their interactions and that kind of thing. And then this section of the book, it was like, I mean, I'll be honest, I teared up several times sitting at work reading at my office at lunch, and I was like, I love it. Hope nobody sees me. How embarrassing.
I teared up at work.
It's fantastic. I mean, it's so good.
Yeah, no, there's some really, I think we both mentioned in the Discord that it's chapter 15 is one of those really powerful ones. And, we were talking about this earlier. There's a lot to talk about here. There's almost more than I feel like we have time for, which is, I think it's just a very rich part of the book, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, we went into it with this kind of idea, like let's each pull 3 things that really stand out to us. And I realized I was only like 2 chapters in, and I'd already gotten my 3. It's like, man, we may have to cover a few more things. We'll try to be quick on each topic, as well as trying to include some of you guys' observations as well.
Totally. I think what we might do once Trout and I have exhausted our resources is we might turn to you, Chad, and ask if there's anything that you think we should be talking about more, or you would like to point out, be it characters, themes, plot points, ideas, or just anything. Sure. That it made you think.
Yeah, and I think, later on in the episode, we are going to go over some of our observations just from some of the less major characters, and I think that would be a really great point for you guys to also be able to throw in your observations, that kind of thing. So
Absolutely.
Well,
let me just say hi to Brie Rico. How you doing?
Hi, Brie.
Scott K, what's up? Randy Dandy, what's up? What's going on, guys? Welcome.
Welcome in, folks. Well, let's get started. We don't have a lot of time.
Let's do it.
So, the first thing and it's funny because we came together to kind of discuss just right before the show. Here are the kind of talking points, and we both the scene with the rabid dog, which I believe was what is that, chapter 10 maybe?
It's the first chapter of this sort of section that we're looking at, but it's a very important one, I think.
Yeah, and it was crazy. So I had mentioned to you, Porto, that the scene that really stood out, or that scene really stood out to me because it seemed like foreshadowing. Like as I was reading it, I was like, oh man, this is the storm on the horizon. And there were a couple things that really stood out to me from that scene. The first was the fact that everybody hid. Everybody was hiding from this, this rabid animal that was dangerous and was unpredictable, and they buried their heads, kind of. And that's something that I think that we'll see as we continue. A lot of people they're aware that there's a problem, but they're not willing to stand up to this problem, and instead they let Atticus handle it, right? So, and so it was essentially analogous to kind of the mindless anger of the mob in Macomb County.
Do you think the dog represents the mob?
Yeah, absolutely. Or perhaps maybe not even the physical mob, but that mentality of like animalistic, irrational anger that a lot of the people have. I mean, even the people that are just sort of randomly mentioned throughout the rest of the portion that we read. You're looking at people that will walk by Jim and Scout who are children and make little comments and that kind of thing. And that feeds into it. It's not just the lynch mob that you have to worry about. It's also the people that sort of approve of it, or the people, like I said, that kind of hide their head in the sand.
Right, the way that the town responds to the mob, and their response is pretty inadequate, I would say, in this instance.
Yeah, even characters like the neighbors that we've sort of, in the first section, we've grown accustomed to, and we have some respect for and fondness for, even though they're minor characters. They're not really, they're not standing up in the middle of the town square saying, this is wrong, we need to be doing better, but instead they're just hiding their heads in the sand and hoping it goes away.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you point this out, because I think it sort of speaks volumes of the richness of this text. I found something completely different in this chapter that I think's of equal value, but it does make sense that you point that out. And just for those who to jog people's memories, the scene is what happens in the scene is there is a mad dog. What's the dog called again? Tim Johnson.
Yeah, it's just a hilarious name for a dog.
Great dog name. Fantastic. If I ever have a dog, that'd probably be a bad omen, actually. But I like the full name for the dog. Tim Johnson is just kind of a mad dog, I guess, and is sort of staggering with this sort of malicious intent, this foreboding intent through town. And the kids spot it, and I think they tell Calpurnia, and she's like, stay inside. And then the neighbors, it becomes this big commotion. Everybody hides inside, and then eventually Atticus is given a gun, and it's revealed that Atticus is a crack shot. He's one shot Atticus, or whatever they call him, something like that, and he kills the dog. And
I think it was One Shot Finch was his name.
One Shot Finch, great name also.
Very cool.
And yeah, I didn't think of the symbolism. I didn't think of that, but that really makes sense, right? The mad dog. But it doesn't really say why. I guess it's just a thing that happens, right?
Sure.
Like that.
Well,
that's kind of
rabid. He had rabies.
Yeah. Well, that's something I spoke about in the Discord a little bit ago, about the mentality of mobs, and not really understanding them. I guess in the same way I don't really understand the mad dog, but that's maybe not important. The fact is, it just happens.
Sure, yeah, it's
and has to be dealt with.
not understanding the science behind why they thought it only happened in the summer, but then at the same time not understanding the psychological process, like what is it called, like macro psychology or mob psychology, understanding the psychology of what causes essentially normally rational people to, in a group, do such horrible things,
Yeah. So in this scene, for me, this chapter, I sort of viewed it on a more character level, about the relationship with Jem, Scout as well, but more Jem and Atticus and their perception of their father. I think it's at the start of this chapter, or perhaps it's the chapter before, I don't know exactly, where they're kind of talking about their views of Atticus as this guy that can't do anything. He's kind of not really this like man's man that they can be proud of. He doesn't play football where all the other dads do. He doesn't do any, I think Calpurnia at some point, or maybe it's Morty, says like, oh, but he's really good at the trombone, and Scout's just even more mortified at that fact. But the incident with Tim Johnson, where it is revealed that he is one-shot Finch, that sort of seems to really have an effect on Jem in particular. And I think this is really important for the story and for Jem's character and for what happens later, because this instills this almost this awe and fear at the start, but then you could see it becomes like this respect later on, where he sort of, when he finds out about, or when they find out that he used to be the best shot in town, but didn't, I can't remember the quote exactly. I should have written it down. In fact, I think I did. Let me just read this for you real quick. Page 106. Yeah, here it is. So, dead shot, echoed Jem. That's what I said, Jem Finch. Guess you'll change your tune now. The very idea, didn't you know his nickname was Old One Shot when he was a boy? Why, down at landing when he was coming up, if he shot 15 times and hit 14 doves, he complained about wasting ammunition. He never said anything about it, Jem muttered. Never said anything about it, did he? No, ma'am. Wonder why he never goes hunting now, I said. Maybe I can tell you, said Miss Morty. If your father's anything, he's civilized in his heart. Marksmanship's a gift of God, a talent. Oh, you have to practice to make it perfect, but shooting's different from playing the piano or the like. I think maybe he put his gun down when he realized that God had given him an unfair advantage over most living things. I guess he decided he wouldn't shoot till he had to, and he had to today. And I feel like this sort of teaches Jem this lesson that there is a real moral fiber. Like, his dad is cool and can do dad stuff, but he's got this like integrity and moral fiber. And at the end of it, he says like, oh, on the end of the chapter, he's like, I'm a gentleman just like dad. And I feel like this is introduced at the perfect point in the story, because this is as the town is turning on the family, as people are talking shit about your dad is protecting Tom Robinson, and I think like this is like essential to keep them on side and to have them not turn on Atticus. What do you think?
I like that, and I think that's absolutely true. One thing that stood out to me, or just kind of struck me just now, is so you've got this dog that everybody sees as like, oh, it's a mad dog, it has to be killed. And who shows up? The sheriff, right? Sheriff Tate.
Yes.
And we're going to get into the character kind of descriptions and what archetypes they represent and that kind of thing later. But Sheriff Tate shows up with the gun, and Atticus shows up from his office. And that's the sheriff's job, right? Is to protect the people.
Yeah.
But instead he hands the rifle over to Atticus. And I think that we'll see later in this section that there's another situation coming up where the same thing happens, where the sheriff is not willing to do his duty to fulfill his oath, and instead Atticus is left to, protect the people, or in this case, a specific person. But that just kind of popped into my head, and I think that's interesting and worth exploring when we kind of get to the later point where we start discussing the characters and where they sit.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's a great chapter, and there's a lot in it, and it's really cool that, like, you know, like we were talking about before, that we both sort of got different things out of it, and I'm sure there's a bunch more in that chapter. People in chat, what did you think of that chapter? Those who read it, is there anything we missed? Hit us up. Shall we move on in the interim?
Yeah, we can move on. You know, you and I both had a section, another section of the book that really stood out to us, and that was Mrs. Dubose.
Dubose.
She, you know, she was the morphine addict who was constantly saying things to Jim and Scout to kind of upset them and to, you know, mean old lady. And we've all had, I know, I can recall several mean old ladies on the street that I grew up on, you know, that were always perhaps not as toxic as Mrs. Dubose, but still, yeah. And then they find out after, you know, Jim destroys her flowers and then is forced to go, you know, read to her every day for a month. They find out that the reason she's so nasty, or one of the reasons, is she's a morphine addict. And so what kind of stood out to me was that as they're describing, as Harper Lee describes the way she is when Jim and Scout go read to her, she's kind of describing this cycle, right, where she's angry and she's toxic when they first get there, and then she settles into a sort of stupor where she's not paying attention. And what stood out to me, and I'd mentioned this to you, Porto, is the idea that Mrs. Dubose is almost a microcosm of the county, Macomb County. The fact that they settle into this stupor until the next event that sort of gets everyone talking and gets everyone riled up, and then that ends in whatever way it ends, you know, and then it goes back to this sort of calm southern, you know, stupor where nothing really changes.
Yeah, it's such an interesting way of looking at it. What is the stupor? Is that just acceptance? What is that?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say because, you know, I'd mentioned to you that I think that to some extent still happens now, that we have these news cycles, at least in America, you know, where we have this like huge news business. But we have these news cycles where there's a new event and it gets everybody riled up, and they push it real hard and everybody's talking about it. And then you settle back into, you know, what is essentially the same thing, where it's like nothing really changes, or things change so slowly that it's not noticeable. Kiwi, exactly. Complacency is that stupor. And
yeah, good point.
You know, it's easy to defend that complacency because you say, well, I have to eat, I have to work, I have all these responsibilities, and then what little time I have left over I spend on Twitch. But you know, it's too easy almost, because it makes you wonder if everybody would just, you know, put a little bit of time and effort into kind of waking up, then perhaps the complacent stupor would not be as powerful. So
I actually think what Kiwi said, and then what you drew from that, and also good morning, Dougie. How you doing? Welcome in. So I think that is one of the strongest arguments, not arguments for, but reasons for, and maybe not excuses for, but ways to understand some of our interaction with news as humans now. And I don't want us to get buried into whatever the current events are, but what at any point in history, you could go back 10 years, you go back 20 years, 30, 40, people are so busy, right? And we have access to these things that we often can't control, or we feel that we can't control. And maybe Macomb County's a little different, where one person can make more of a difference, and maybe Atticus is kind of a representative of that. But I do understand that feeling of like, oh my God, overwhelmed by all this shit. Fuck, that's terrible. Oh, if only this, if only that. But then that but oh man, I really got to go to sleep and go to work tomorrow. And you just, it's hard to I guess one person can only stretch themselves so far.
Sure.
And then you get bombarded with more stuff, like you said, that cycle, the new thing comes, and then the cycle begins again. And so while I think it's a problem, and maybe always has been, or has been for a long time, I think it's an understandable one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's kind of the same issue. You always hear people read the headline, but they don't read the story, right?
Yeah.
Who's got time to read the whole story? Like, I've got time to scroll through the headlines real quick on a 3-minute smoke break, and then I'm back in the office working. So yeah, absolutely. So I just found it interesting that kind of stood out to me, was this idea that it's like this cyclical nature. But the redeeming thing is the fact that Ms. Dubose finally kicked the habit, right? So maybe that's in our future as humanity, or maybe that's, who knows?
Maybe
we'll kick the
that's
habit.
Yeah, that's salvation, because in the end she did get off the morphine. Excuse me one moment, need to sorry about that. Yeah, that's really interesting. And because she was weaning off it the entire time. So if we're looking at this as kind of an allegory for, let's say, Macomb County, which is kind of what I'm getting from what you're saying, what's the morphine then? What is the morphine?
I don't know. I mean,
it's the thing that kind of quells her pain, but it's the thing that puts her in the stupor.
Exactly. Yeah. So maybe it's the expression of the hatred that we see, going forward. It puts people back at ease to separate things and to get, justice and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I hadn't even considered that.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking then. So Dougie says, it's important to note that anger drives shares and clicks, so news is always going to tell you the side of the story that makes you angry. Sometimes it's a full story, but more often it's not. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And I think that happened before shares and clicks even. I mean, when it was just selling newspapers or getting ratings on television.
Sure, or just having a conversation. I mean, sometimes you want things to be more dramatic than they are, or sometimes you want to focus on the negative, and I think that's just human nature. But it's certainly
I have a tendency to do that sometimes as well.
It's certainly the nature of mass media, right?
Kiwi says maybe Atticus always reading the paper is a testament to his character not being so complacent at his fellow neighbors. No, I think that's a really good point. He's all like, his leisure is almost study in a way, right? So yeah, he dedicates his time to that, I guess. So once again, dude, we both wanted to look at the same thing, and I find your take on it really, really compelling and fascinating. And it hadn't crossed my mind until we spoke, to be honest. I feel like I'm looking a little more literally as these characters in terms of a structure and themes. I'm not sure, but here's what I wrote as a little title for my thing on chapter 11, humanizing bigots. And I think a lot of this book is about humanizing an other. And we can get into what humanizing even means, because to be honest, if you put a gun to my head and said define it, I'd probably be vague still. She's mean-spirited and callous, like you said. She says some things like probably we can't even repeat if we want the channel to stay online, about Atticus defending Tom Robinson, which, she's obviously a racist, and it's also in terrible form to be talking crap about a children's only parent to them. Like, right. That's kind of in bad taste just in general. But I feel like the revelation of this morphine addiction that comes from Atticus later, it doesn't soften those things for me. It doesn't discount from those things, but it adds this, what starts as this just callous harpy, essentially, that causes misery and no joy, and is scary and even kind of gross and disgusting. Like, they're kind of afraid of just her presence, even when she's going through the withdrawals or whatever. you find out that she was lonely and in constant pain. And that's not a justification, but I feel like it's still, you sort of see this person as joyless themselves. And I don't know, I just feel like the revelation from Atticus at the end is humanizing, and it sort of just takes away the demon. It just shows a deeply flawed human for me, and I think that's really important. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And then, I also think the way that it describes his interactions with her, just every day he'd walk by and he acted like everything was totally normal, and she wasn't saying all these terrible things, and he'd tip his hat to her, how do you do, ma'am, totally friendly. And I think it's because he recognized that she was not this monster that the kids saw her as. Even though she said and did monstrous things, she was instead just a flawed human like the rest of us.
Yeah. It's like they don't share ideas, they don't share values, but they do share the state of being alive with fears and aspirations. They share humanity on some level, right?
Sure.
And I think, this is just one example of that, but I feel that's a major theme I'm getting is in this novel, is this almost as a remedy to hatred, humanizing as a remedy to hatred. And that goes for Miss DuBose, that goes for Boo Radley, that goes for Atticus and all of the people that are hating on him. That goes, I think, later on when we talk about the trial and all this kind of business. And I think that will come up in potentially the next thing we might want to talk about. I think you had a lot you wanted to talk about with, if you want to move on, Trout, to chapter 15.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to get into that because, the humanization theme is kind of going with my next point. But I did want to point out a couple of things that Dougie had said that are very insightful.
Please.
He had said, I'd say humanizing is simply reminding others that another person is just that, another human, just as capable of making mistakes. And then he talks about something. We just had this conversation last weekend when we had our little meeting, our midweek meeting. He said the idea that if you were in 1930s Germany, you wouldn't have been also complicit, or just a bystander who didn't speak up. Everybody says that because, it's a very easy dehumanizing term. But all of the German citizenry were normal people taken in by a group of monsters. Yeah, and so we were just talking about part of coming to terms with and being a fully actualized person is recognizing your capacity for monstrosity. And what that does is that humanizes the monsters. It makes you realize, like, oh, well, I'm just as capable of these things given the right circumstances. I'm not going to go out right now and do something monstrous. But if I was hungry enough or desperate enough, and I would say the same for everybody watching and for you, Porto, all it takes is the right circumstances, and we're all capable of monstrous acts. And I think that that's what makes Atticus one of the legendary literary heroes, is that he seems to kind of often be the only one that, while humanizing all of the monstrosity around him, he is one of the few that's willing to fight against the current, Yes,
but even he still has murderous capability. Sure. And that, if we go back to the dog, like, he's one-shot Finch, like he has almost this gift for it, which is fascinating. So even the person that chooses to go against the grain still has it inside of him. He just makes that decision to go in what he believes seems to be the right way.
Sure.
No, that's a really good point that Dougie makes, and that is kind of what we were talking about the other day. I'm reminded, this is going a little bit off. Well, no, it's related, but it's not about the book. It reminds me of this episode of Black Mirror that some people in chat might have seen, or you might have seen, Trout, where there is a war taking place against these like zombie type characters, these monsters, and the army's out there, and it's, you know, you can imagine the scenes. They go out and raid this building and try and clear it of all these like rabid, you know, flesh-eating zombies that have gone crazy. But there's a revelation later on that the army in question has been, I think it's through some kind of technology. Maybe it's through their lenses in their eyes, or I can't remember exactly the specifics, but they're in fact not fighting zombies. They've just changed their perception to make them seem like zombies. They're just defenseless humans. And so the idea is you need to otherize and turn into monsters to be able to sort of have this like hatred and aggression against.
Sure. Or Ender's Game is another great example of a story where at the end of that, these kids all think they're playing a game, but really they're leading these, you know, squadrons and battalions of ships. They think it's just like a real-time strategy game, but that's the only way that the leadership knows that they can get these kids to commit genocide, essentially. So they have no idea they're doing it. To them, it's just little icons, you know. But, you know, we're talking about humanizing characters that are perhaps distasteful or hateful, and the one character that really stood out to me that I felt like had this like duality, or sort of this like monstrosity or monstrous side, as well as an idealistic side, is Mr. Underwood, the guy that runs the newspaper. So yeah. When they're talking about how like Jim and Scout would go to town and they'd hear these little comments and that kind of thing, I think Mr. Underwood was included in that specifically. I think that he made a comment here or there, or they overheard him talking about, you know, how terrible it is that Atticus Finch would defend Tom Robinson. But so he's clearly a racist. He's a bigoted, you know, character. But then at the same time, when the siege at the jailhouse occurs, you find out at the end he was watching all along. He had his Doom 2, you know, double-barreled shotgun, and was ready to, you know, he was ready to defend the ideals of the justice system. So despite his racist views, or his sort of kind of going along with, he's complicit in what the county or the town is doing, he still had this ideal that's almost parallel in a lot of ways to Atticus. It's maybe not expressed in the same way, but he has this ideal for the law and what the law can accomplish. So I thought that was interesting. And I wrote here, he's a product of the society in which he lives, yet at the same time holds up a pure ideal despite his racist views. And I think that's important. I think there's a lot of people maybe in that town or in that county or in the world at large who have these, you know, bigoted or backwards views, and yet still are able to put those aside when it comes to the greater ideal, you know, whether it's truth or beauty or justice or whatnot.
Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? And I mean, that whole scene, that whole chapter, there's a lot in it, but in particular, Mr. Underwood, I found that very interesting. I wonder what it is. I guess he is almost like an argument for the use of these systems and structures, and that if we follow them, they can. Because in that scene, he seems to be more with Atticus. Like, for that, I got a little confused as I was reading it. I'm like, oh, hang on, I thought he was a fucking racist. I thought he'd be with the mob or whatever. But he still kind of is. Mm-hmm. But he, because he believes in the system, in the due course of justice, he's civilized, I guess, in a way, and I don't know. It's that sort of shows the complexity and nuance of some of these characters as well. Oh, want to become famous? Yes, I do. And yeah, he's a fascinating one because that is humanized, right? Because you see, it's easy to point out these. It's much easier to point out, let's say, what's his, like, the Ewells or Cunningham,
Right.
and go, look at these horrible backward monsters that want to go and commit violence and are dirty and just have this kind of just gross energy about them. It's much easier to look at them and say racist, bad, but then if you have to forced to look at a Underwood, he has some ideas that might be completely messed up, but there is at least a foundation there, which can keep a society stable. I don't know. I'm probably talking around in circles a little bit because it is a complex character.
Yeah,
it's really interesting.
I think, the way that I see it is, if you look at the lynch mob as throwing justice out the window, and then you look at Atticus as sort of this shining beacon of all that's good, Underwood's kind of in the middle, where he doesn't want to throw the justice system away totally. He still has faith in these systems. He just would see it work a different way, and I think that's important. Not that I'm defending, his racist views or anything, but I do think it's important to have these, like, sort of structural foundational systems in place, and not to just throw the baby out with the bathwater. But instead to be like, okay, well, we need to work on this. We need to work on these systems in order, to perfect them, or to get closer to an idea of perfection, I guess. And so that's where, like, the justice system is a perfect example of a system where it's like, well, we don't want to throw it away totally, but we see problems in it, and we see, the flaws, and so let's reform, or let's, work on it without getting too political. I do think that that's sort of maybe the lesson to be learned from that,
No, I hear you now. I hear you. I just wanted to say hey to Ezra, and how you doing, man? And to PSX Boy, welcome in, guys. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for joining us. No, that's true, right? And I guess if you look at Underwood and Atticus, opposing views, it would seem, about some of the issues in this novel, but work together because they believe in the methods. And that's almost that almost sounds like a utopia for me, because I don't believe, I personally, and maybe I'm getting a little too heavy here, but I don't believe humans should aim for a place where we all have the same view.
Sure.
Because that sounds totalitarian to me, and that sounds like a cult to me. Because we're always improving, we're always advancing as we learn more. We're always going to look back to our past and go, look, we fucked that up. We messed that up. We thought we were right, we were wrong, and that's going to continue to happen. We would be stupid to think otherwise. So then, for my mind, a place where people can have opposing ideals, and of course I'm on Team Atticus here, but just they can work together to stop the barbarism,
right,
and to foster something that is better for everyone. That's really powerful, I think.
Yeah, I think it's telling that Mr. Underwood, he sees Jim and Scout in the balcony, and they're mixing, with the colored folk up in the balcony, and he scoffs, and Scout sees him, kind of like, he scoffs as if like, oh, here's another example of those finches, breaking the sort of social norms. And so Scout says to Jim, she says, well, he's going to tell on us or whatnot. And Jim says, no, he'll just put it in like the society part of the paper, as opposed to like making it part of the main story, the front page story, while the trial was going on, blah, 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 Finch's kids were up there, instead he puts it on the back page, which it shouldn't be news, clearly, but at least he has some, ideal. So once again, I don't mean to be defending Mr. Underwood, but I am pointing out is there's sort of a duality to his character. There's sort of a nuance there that I think is worth exploring.
Yeah. And that's really, it's fascinating. There's a lot to it. I just want to read what Dougie said here. Justice systems are incredibly important for protecting the innocent, a job they don't do enough. I'd rather see 1,000 guilty people go free than one innocent man go to prison. Wow. don't know what I think about that. I'd have to think more about that, but I do believe in protecting the innocent for sure. Absolutely. And having the same view is awful. Single party rule always. Yeah. I mean, look, I haven't had a lot of experience. I'm a 34-year-old man. But from what I hear, that's I would agree. From what I hear, Dougie,
Sure.
Totally. Man, do you want to talk a little bit more about this chapter 15? Because I think, we've spoken about Mr. Underwood. There's a lot in this. This was, you mentioned this was the chapter that caused you to tear up, I think, right?
Yeah, well, it was one of them for sure. Mr. Cunningham was an interesting character. And I think that kind of goes along the lines of humanizing the monstrous people. Or people that are committing or capable of monstrous acts. The scene with Mr. Cunningham was really interesting because if you guys remember, there was an earlier scene where his son came over and had dinner with them, and she learned about how they were hardworking, prideful people, and they never borrowed money like the Ewells did. They never took off of the county social welfare programs. They worked for everything they had, even if they had to trade a bag of walnuts for medical care. That's how they did it. They never owed anybody anything. And so Atticus had spoken of Mr. Cunningham with sort of it's like he's our equal. He may not have everything that we have, but in terms of what he contributes to this society, he's our equal. And then you see Mr. Cunningham showing up ready to, possibly kill Atticus, but definitely kill Tom Robinson.
I was going to ask about that. Was that? I mean, that there's violent intent. Do you think they're going there to kill them both, or are they going to beat the fuck out of them? Like, I was trying to figure that out.
I don't know that they expected Atticus to be there. I mean, because he just grabbed the extension cord and the light and was like, "All right, I'm just
out
gonna,
there."
see, because he knew that they were up to no good, but and the way that they sort of tried to reason with Atticus. Like, come on, get out of the way, man. We're here to do this, and
you're not going to stop us, kind of thing.
Yeah, so I don't know that they would have killed him, but they certainly would have perhaps beat the hell out of him. One thing that really got me was what's the line that Atticus says several times, and it's sort of like that. Jim and Scout recognize it as like he's testing people when he says, "Do you really think so?" Like calmly says, "Do you really think so?"
Yeah.
That's such a crazy line, because I think that, myself, I have anger issues. I would have freaked out. I would have been yelling, like, "Get out of here," whatever. He just calmly says, "Do you really think so?" It's like Socratic, he's making them reevaluate their position calmly, stoically, which is just incredible.
Well, this is where sometimes I find Atticus to be an idealized character. I'm not sure I don't know if a human is capable of being as strong as he is and being as compassionate as he is. But for me, that doesn't diminish the tale. Like, because he's an ideal, and it's good to have ideals. Because he's under so much duress in this situation.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like.
Well, especially when his kids show up. That's what. It's almost like that's when he starts to. But it describes how he's folding the the newspaper, and his hands are shaking. It's incredible.
Yeah. That's if we continue talking about this theme of humanizing in this scene, Scout does a wonderful job of it, inadvertently. And you mentioned this earlier, and I was thinking it too. When she comes and I don't know what she's trying to do. I think she's just innocently just being like, "Hi, how you going?"
But
I feel like maybe she doesn't understand.
In a panicky kind of way. Like, she doesn't understand what's going on until sort of the end of the scene, but she knows something's off. And so something's
weird.
Exactly.
Yeah. And she starts talking about Walter Cunningham's son and the fact that he came round and talks about some of the more commonplace everyday discussions. I think that I don't have anything written down about it, but that Atticus had told her about leaving the nuts and stuff like that.
Yeah, like what I had said. She said, "Oh, my dad says you're a really hard worker and you're a great member of the community, even though you don't have all the money and everything." She just spills her guts about it, and it's like,
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, though.
And I beat up your son. A couple of times she's like, yeah, I beat up your son, but I won't do that anymore, I promise. And there's this, she, I think, forces Walter to see them.
Mm-hmm.
Like forces to like see not the monster or the person preventing me from getting their perceived monster or whatever it is, or she forces this recognizing of shared history and common bonds, and it's super powerful. I can't remember what he says in the end, but he basically just gives up and goes home, right?
Yeah. He just says, "Come on, guys, let's go." You know.
This is, he can't do it. He can't do it.
And you know, another thing that stood out to me is they mentioned several times, sort of in that section of the book, about the shinny. You know, they're all shinnied up, which is moonshine, so they're drunk. And I think it's interesting that that's one of the things, similar to Mrs. Dubose with the morphine. It's almost like people use that as an excuse, kind of like, well, you know, they're drunk, so that's why they did it. And I told you earlier that I think before they had their first drink, they knew what they were going to do, and that the moonshine was to calm the nerves and to get them ready and riled up. And you know, in the same sense as Mrs. Dubose, where it's like, I think she had these foul views, and it's almost like the morphine addiction was an excuse. Well, you know, she's having a tough time. And it makes me wonder, what areas of our lives do we excuse bad behavior based on external things when really it is an internal thing of the heart, you know?
This might be a good one to open up to chat. I often wonder about that, you know, like in my life, I've done some things, not things like in this novel, but I've done some things that I've been like, oh man, like just down to saying something to somebody, or certain behavior when I've been under influence of certain things, and
or you're just tired, you know,
or you're tired, or you and yeah, I sometimes wonder, like, man, did I, like, is that me? So I recall. There's been a few moments in my life, I don't want to get too personal, but where I've looked back on myself and gone, was that really me? I don't like who I am when I do that thing.
Yeah.
But then that almost might be an excuse, you know, when you talk about the premeditated nature of what Cunningham and his mob were going to do. I wonder if it's always that way. I'm not sure. Like, if it's something that, like, subconsciously people use these things as an excuse for. I think definitely in this instance it was. Yeah. But what do you think? Is it always that way?
Well, I don't know. I think that, you know, in the context of the story, yeah, it probably is the norm there. And then, you know, now that I think about it in the context of our day-to-day lives, it's also the norm. I mean, the big one, you know, I can't say like, oh, I did this terrible thing when I was smoking crack, because I don't smoke crack. But what I am is, like, I'm short on sleep all the time, or I'm hungry constantly. I have these base human needs, and it's really easy as a human to find some excuse, some reason that I snapped at a coworker, or hung up on my mom when we were talking on the phone and she said something that upset me, you know. That doesn't happen often, trust me. But yeah, I think it's really easy to find some excuse. And so it stood out to me, the moonshine has several times has been the excuse for people's behavior. Well, you know, he's shinnied up, so it doesn't matter. Or his, you know, we can excuse that behavior, when really it's like, no, I think he's just an asshole.
Yeah, well, and people also, I'm just thinking about, you know, people look forward to, you know, let's say it's Friday and you've got work drinks or whatever it is, it might not be drinks for people, it might be some other way to let go, whatever it is. People look forward to that. So that almost presupposes a desire for something we're not telling ourselves we want to do, right? A desire to sort of let go of constraints or whatever that may be. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you know, whatever your method of escapism is, if it's excessive or if it's not, just, I mean, obviously it's nice to sit down for a little while and escape with a good book or a movie or a game or
Mm.
whatnot. But if you're doing it constantly, then there may be some underlying issues that you need to look at, and that's probably something we
Mm.
could all, uh, you know, find an area close to home where we're like, oh man, yeah,
Yeah, me
that's
for sure.
exactly
Me
what
for
I'm
sure.
doing.
So I just want to read some of Dougie's comments here. Scout definitely doesn't know what's happening. I think she reminds Cunningham that they are human too, not an enemy, and his response in turn humanizes him. Yes, totally agree. So when people are drunk, some people act a lot differently and some people are just more of themselves. Yeah, I think it also depends on circumstance. You might have, the same person might be different in two different circumstances, I think, as well. But it's an interesting one. I think there's a lot of, stuff about the subconscious that that I don't understand fully.
Yeah, he also, Dougie says here that we should note that these things are happening in groups, and which kind of touches on that, and like mob mentality and mob psychology we were talking about. An echo chamber unmoderated can lead to extreme ideas. But here's the scary thing that pops into my head is that it's our natural inclination. I think we're inclined to join echo chambers, and we're not so inclined to notice that we're in one. It's really easy to point at this group and be like, oh, well, that's just an echo chamber. You know, they don't have any nuanced discussion.
But we do.
But we do. Yeah, we're the ones that our eyes are open to the truth, and we're willing to go down these roads intellectually or philosophically to determine the real truth. Their eyes are blinded by the echo chamber, and that's kind of scary.
That's another dehumanizing comment, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Like it's a little less dehumanizing, but it's kind of it subtracts a kind of something from other groups. So Ezrin says, I think what alcohol does across the board is take away people's inhibitions. Sometimes that makes people act differently because they struggle against their worst impulses when sober. And sometimes it just exaggerates behavior because they're less filtered. Yeah, no, I think I agree with that, Ez. I think I agree with that. And Atticus goes against the grain of society pretty well, but he probably goes against the grain of his... that's interesting. You think he goes against the grain of his own desires? Okay, that's really interesting. In what way do you think? Like, would it be the desire to perhaps act aggressively towards that mob, the desire to be like, fuck you guys are fucking assholes or something like that? Or in what sense, Ezra? That's really interesting.
Well, the thing that I'm thinking, yeah, because Ezra, and I think that's a fantastic point. One just minor example is when he goes to the courthouse, or the jailhouse, excuse me, to sit out front. It says he comes in, he grabs the extension cord and the light, and then he gets in the car, and then it points out that he would always walk, no matter the weather or if it was raining or anything, and there and back was a 2-mile walk, which is not an insignificant distance, and so just in that minor thing, he could easily hop in the Mercury and drive into town like everybody else does, but he goes against his own desires every day when he's on his way to work. And I don't know, it just popped into my head. I don't think that that's necessarily that meaningful, but it is an example of him, saying like, no, I'm gonna walk instead. Even in bad weather, even in because that's what's right.
So I feel like we could go on about this part of the book for another couple of hours, but we are starting to run a little bit out of time, so maybe we'll move on. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
So where should we go next? I've got a few other little points. Is there anything you wanted to bring up, Trout?
Well, not really. I think that's most of the points that I had down. I think there's more to get into when we kind of get into the section near the end where we start discussing the characters and characterization and different minor characters and what we all thought of them, including you guys in chat. But for now, I think that's all I've got. And I'll tell you what, I know this is really rude. I have to use the bathroom so bad. Do you think you can handle things for a second?
Don't leave me here. I've never done this before.
I'll be right back.
All right. So, guys, Now we can talk shit about Trout. All right, let's all talk about let's talk about what we hate about Trout the most, everyone. No, I'm just kidding, guys. Let me actually catch up with chat. Is there anything you want us to talk about that we haven't yet? I've got a few more things I've written down here, and it's mostly in regards to certain character interactions and certain characters. I really want to talk about Alexandra, the aunt. I really want to talk about this scene with Calpurnia and Scout, which I think is really cool. This idea came to me. And then I think Trout and I said we're going to briefly touch on the trial as well, which sounds weird that we're going to do it briefly, but we're not at the end of it yet at this point in the book. So I feel like next, the final episode or meeting of the FLS for this book will really be focused on the trial. Let me catch up with you guys. No, don't apologize for the essays, Dougie. This is the point. It's we want this to be a kind of a community thing, right? It's not just Trout and I being like, "Ooh, look what we know." We're discussing our ideas, and we want to hear your ideas as well. Yeah, tribalism, I agree, is dehumanizing, Dougie. I totally agree with that. And Ezrin says, thinking about the conversation about him refusing to teach. Yeah, right. Well, and maybe the whole thing with the guns as well in general, Ezrin, which we were talking about before, where he used to be the crack shot, is him denying something sort of, monstrous in himself. No, I'm with that. I'm with that.
Dougie asked, do you think Atticus believes he's above the rest of the town? And that could kind of lead into Auntie Alexandria, because God. No, Dougie, I don't think so. I think that he's probably the one Finch. Well, maybe his brother as well has pretty grounded views. But there's that scene where he has to go in and explain to his kids because his sister demands it. He has to explain that they're of higher breeding and that kind of thing. And you can tell he knows it's bullshit. Like, you can tell he knows it's ridiculous.
Of all the characters, and there's some pretty reprehensible actions in this novel. Of course, I don't need to detail that. That being said, of all the characters, I find Aunt Alexandra the hardest pill to swallow. She is just
awful.
Something about her just is really rotten to like insidious. Sure. For me, she's worse than Mrs. DuBose. For me, look, it's not that she doesn't really have wild actions at this point. There's worse things that are done, but her sort of archetypal character, this nosy do-gooder, this sanctimonious, pious,
like a
busybody.
Moral busybody, I think. Yeah.
Oh, I feel like everyone knows of someone like this, or everyone either in fiction or IRL or has heard of someone like this, and I feel like she's a real archetype. And there's a quote here that I think really embodies it, what I dislike about this character, and I think this is from Scout, and she says, "I looked down the street, enamored, upright, uncompromising. Aunt Alexandra was sitting in a rocking chair exactly as if she had sat there every day of her life." There's this like entitlement.
Yeah.
This confidence and self-assuredness that it just grosses me out, and obviously she's there to be a kind of foil to Atticus and to cause tension in the home. She wants Calpurnia out. She wants Scout to be more of a lady. She wants Atticus to sort of teach her children to conform more. And she just, I know she's kind of designed to gross me out, but it's a mission accomplished. What do you guys think?
Well, here's what I think about her. I think, and I know, I have known so many people like this. She's more concerned with the way things appear than the way they actually are. And that's what drives me nuts about her. Doesn't bother me so much that she maybe wants Scout to have a little bit more feminine influence in her life. That's fair. Scout's mom died. She never even knew her. So it's fair that she wants to come in and be a maternal character. What bothers me the most is that she clearly doesn't care how things actually are. She cares how they appear. And that's tough for me, somebody that cares less about the way things appear and more about the way they are, so
yeah. Let me just say, Blacks, I think that's actually a good little summary right there. And Ez, take care, dude. It was lovely chatting with you. No, you're right, man. And when you mentioned this appearances thing, I was just reminded, sorry to get a little distracted here. Has anyone ever seen the BBC, the British, I think it's like an 80s or 90s comedy called Keeping Up Appearances?
I've never seen it, no.
So the general plot is there's basically there's the Bucket family. The Bucket family, and they're trying to pretend that they're no longer lower class. They've tried to infiltrate the middle upper class, and so they refer to themselves as the Bouquet residents. It's the Bouquet residents, lady of the house speaking, and the other characters are obviously their working class family who haven't the brother who hasn't learned how to keep up appearances and pretend. And actually, in many ways, she is kind of another Alexandra archetype. I can't remember the protagonist's name or the central character's name, but I was just reminded of that.
Yeah. So, one thing that strikes me is Mel, I think you're onto something with the sort of classist vibes, but I don't think it's Atticus. I mean, if you remember from the first section that we read, or part 1, the admiration that he had for Mr. Cunningham, who later obviously sort of betrays that admiration, but he was constantly telling Scout that we're just the same as anyone else, that we're all just hardworking and trying to contribute to a better world. But I do see it in Auntie. I definitely see it. Not just the racist vibes of no, you can't go to Calpurnia's, or it's shameful that you went to the black church, but also in she needs to be ladylike and not mix with the poor and that kind of thing, and that we're of finer breeding. So I do think that there are some classist and racist vibes. I don't think they're coming from Atticus, though.
That's interesting. There's a structure. There's wild hierarchies. It's not a 2-tiered situation here. There's different. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff going on, and yeah, I think I kind of agree there that it comes from Alexandra. I think it comes from. Yeah, I think she would be the one that gives it most. Atticus probably recognizes it, and maybe this goes back to what Ez was saying about Atticus trying to maybe having some things about himself that he's not showing or not wanting to express. He might recognize that these people who are from a different class might be less educated and have these worse ideas, but he does definitely preach to his children to view them as humans. And Calpurnia also does that as well. If we go back to when last time when the Yule kid comes in and Scout's talking all kinds of noise about the way the kid's eating with the molasses or something like that, and Calpurnia scolds the shit out of her, when someone's in your house, you got to treat them as equals. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, just minor correction. That was actually the Cunningham kid, right? Wasn't it?
Sorry. The Yules and the Cunninghams. I muddled them up.
Well, and then Calpurnia does it again at the Black Church. It's almost a little reverse. But remember the lady at the beginning where she's like, "Why are you bringing these kids in here?" And she says, "Hey, they're just as welcome here. This is the house of God, isn't it? I mean, we're all brothers and sisters in Christ." And
totally.
So she kind of does it, both sides. And that was an interesting scene. We didn't really talk about that, but it was really neat to kind of get a view of how their, separated society kind of worked, and how the church was kind of the central point of congregation. And it was really neat to see the pastor, you know, they're raising money. How would you feel, you know, being in that situation where they're like, well, we're $1 short of what we need?
Oh, no
Lock
one's
the
leaving.
doors.
That's
Yeah,
right.
that
No
was
one's leaving
insane.
until we get that money to support yeah, because there's a family in trouble, right? Yeah. You know, in a way, like I remember thinking about that as I was reading it. I would be pissed in the moment. I'd be like, God damn it.
Yeah, it's so hot.
But at the same time, though, it'd be pretty nice to belong to a community that you know that if you were in trouble, that the pastor would make everyone would lock the doors in on people until they helped you out. So
yeah,
I don't
do
know.
it for you too.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just Melissa says that she's talking about the character he represents, not himself. Do you mean, Melissa, when we're talking about Atticus, I think, do you mean more like his function from like if we step back outside of him, just his function in the overall narrative? Because that kind of makes sense then.
Yeah, like maybe Harper Lee had that perspective, you know. But keep in mind that he's loosely based on Harper Lee's dad. So, you know, maybe she just really had a lot of respect for her dad. So...
Yo, Beezy, thank you so much, dude. I'm glad you are. I would love to talk a little bit more about Calpurnia and this church scene as well. I think it is a really interesting one. I think there's some. I like the humanizing again of this, and because I think to humanize, you know, when we talk about Miss Lafayette de Beauce, you know, she's sort of humanized from this negative, monstrous view to a, you know, you see some of some of her struggles and pain, I guess, and you get the complexity. I also think there's kind of another way of humanizing which shows that everything has its flaws, you know, like when we go to this other church, it's generally very pleasant, it's generally very friendly, it's generally seems harmonious, and you know, it's very kind of, what's the word, almost Spartan in how it's designed or whatever. But there is some tension there. I can't remember, what's that lady's name that and you mentioned her before, and she's not.
I can't remember.
Yeah, and she's kind of a bit of a POS. Like, she's not impressed that they're there, and you can see I really like that as well. Like, I like that duality where there are divisions everywhere, and I think that is humanizing in a way, rather than just showing this, because it would be easy to show this perfect ideal where everyone was singing and it was beautiful and everyone had a good time and literally everyone was welcoming. Like, for me, showing the complexity of that church makes it more human for me and more believable.
Yeah.
And I actually appreciated that more.
You know, one thing that stood out to me, and this is something where it was kind of uncomfortable really to read, when they go to the church, they go right up front and they get a front row seat, you know, because, and I guess you could argue, well, they're guests in the church, but there's also sort of a vibe where it's like, okay, we have white people in the church, and so the people that have already grabbed their seats in the front row are like, well, we got to move. And then when they're in the courtroom scene,
that happens in the court,
same thing
doesn't it?
happens. Yeah, they some other people stand up and move out of the way for the white children, you know, like, and it's like, oh man, that's tough, and it makes you wonder, kind of in what areas, and not necessarily just, you know, white and black, but in all kinds of areas, where are people getting this this sort of special privilege that you're not even noticing, you know what I mean, that you're blind to? Because even the black people, it's not like they begrudgingly, well, I guess I'll get up. They gladly got up, you know?
Yeah, that's the type of shit that's ingrained in people from birth, right? Just like whatever culture you're in and whatever time, there are inherent power structures. I guess power is one way of putting it. And everyone follows suit, I guess. And not many people break the mold. But then again, you know, that's where Atticus is kind of someone who pushes back against some of those that he doesn't believe in. Calpurnia is that too, I think, in that, I mean, first that she brings the kids to the church, that already receives a bit of pushback, although it's quite, you know, her son welcomes them and the pastor welcomes them. Yeah, fascinating. I want to catch up with Chad, 'cause I think there's a couple of interesting things going on here, but I wouldn't mind sticking. I know we're starting to run out of time. We probably want to wrap it up in the next kind of 15, 20 minutes. But there's another thing with Calpurnia and Scout that I just found one of the most interesting parts of the novel thus far. So Dougie says, a church is really supposed to be a community that has your back. Even 2,000 years ago, communities formed so they could pay to protect each other from persecution. Yeah. That's got to be one of the biggest appeals, right?
Sure.
Oftentimes they'd win over a rich, influential patron to protect the church. Surprisingly, they weren't the ones in charge in the end. Interesting.
Minor side note, and I enjoyed Dougie's comment. As someone that was raised in the church, I know we're short on time, but no one sits in the front row. The church I grew up at, that's where the youth group had to sit, because, when are you most subject to not paying attention, falling asleep in church, is when you're kind of middle school, high school age. And so they put all those kids in the front row so that the pastor could keep a watchful eye on the young members of his flock. And I always, I never realized until just now that that's exactly why they did it. I always thought, oh, cool, I get to sit with my friends at church. But really, it's so that the leaders of the church can make sure that you're not acting up or, doing anything untoward with the young girls.
Well, that's where you put the naughty kids in class as well, right?
Right, exactly. Although I was the good kid that gleefully grabbed the front seat because I was there to learn.
You suck up.
And I brought an apple every once in a while as well.
God damn, teacher's pet over here. So Melissa says that about Atticus that he's part of the educated class and is almost the only one who humanizes the other, while the working poor are stuck in their ways with racist tendencies. That's very interesting. I think that there is truth to what you're saying. I think in the context, though, there is truth to that being true. I mean, depending on what kind of education you're getting, not all education is good. I don't think necessarily it's his education which is the idealized part of him, though I do agree. I can't contradict that. I think it's still his willingness to stand up for himself, because there might be others in town. If we go back to the dog, there might be others in town who, if you got to their honest feelings in their heart, they might actually feel similarly to him, but they're not willing to act. They're not willing to at least stand up when the time is called for them to stand up for something. So I don't know. I agree. I do agree, but I think that it's more than his education, in my opinion.
Well, I also think that there are plenty of examples of less educated people. Miss Maudie, Calpurnia, although I guess there is that point where Calpurnia is probably the most educated among her community.
Well, Calpurnia is pretty educated. Yeah,
she can read, and many of the others can't. So I suppose there is some truth there. But I was just going to say there are some other characters that are not so educated that also share that view. The more liberal view of humankind kind of being just the same.
This is really interesting, actually, that you're talking about this, Melissa Kim, because this actually leads really well into the point I wanted to talk about with Calpurnia and Scout. I feel like it's actually kind of really related. And also, hello, Carrion, how you doing? Welcome in. So there's on page 136, it's probably not 136 for everyone, but in chapter, let me find it. I think it's probably chapter 13 or something like that. It's just after the church scene. In chapter 12, sorry. There's a really fascinating interaction with Scout and Calpurnia, where Scout basically realizes that Calpurnia speaks differently when she's at the church to when she's with them. And Scout asks some things that, they're coming from a child, so they're innocently said, but they're also very ignorant. You know, there's kind of a deep ignorance and about some of the questions he's asking, because she basically assumes that the black way that Calpurnia speaks is worse in some way, or less educated in some way. And she says, like, but don't you know better, or whatever? She kind of
she
says,
says
like,
you speak correctly when you're at our house. Why do you speak incorrectly when you're there?
Yeah, and there's this quote that Calpurnia has, and I read it, and I feel like you can read it in two ways. And the second way is almost more compelling. So this is the last quote I'm going to read, I promise. So she responds after the quote where Scout says, "But Cal, you know better." And then she says, "It's not necessary to tell all you know. It's not ladylike." That's interesting. In the second place, folks don't like to have someone around knowing more than they do. It aggravates them. You're not going to change any of them by talking right. They've got to want to learn themselves. And when they don't want to learn, there's nothing you can do but keep your mouth shut or talk their language. And there's two ways of reading this, I think. And the first one is obviously the direct response, where she's saying, well, why she doesn't speak that way when she's at the church, why she doesn't speak in the quote unquote correct way when she's at the church. But then I sort of realized as well that she also might be responding to Scout's ignorance in itself.
Exactly. It's the converse.
Where she's saying, you've got to want to know. I can't tell you, because Calpurnia responds, this is like kind of, you know, a lot of people would be pretty upset with some of these things that Scout's saying, even though it's coming from a kid. Like, you might be like, shut the hell up. Like, there's nothing worse about this language. It's just a different way of speaking. But she has this sort of almost this Atticus-like calmness in her response, where she's like, look, you know, I can't teach you everything. You know, you've got to kind of want it, and you've got to want to learn it. And then what happens next? The very next line, Scout asks if she can come and visit. So it's like Scout sort of shows this desire suddenly to want to learn and understand. And I was really fascinated by this idea that Calpurnia is kind of speaking on two levels there. Does that make sense, or am I crazy?
No, it totally makes sense. It's so funny, because that's kind of like, you know, some of my analogies I picked up earlier, and you were like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. I had not considered that. I had kind of thought she was speaking very forthright, just about like, well, this is why I do it. I know better. But yeah, and that's so that just kind of shows where my perspective is stuck. As someone who speaks perfectly, you know. You're absolutely right. That's so cool, man. That like, yeah, she's kind of teaching her a lesson. She's saying like, yeah, you have to want to. And there's no point in me sitting you down and just lecturing you about what is true, or what, you know, or even my perspective. And then, you know, a similar point is, I realized at a certain point, I remember being, you know, in my late teens, early 20s, meeting new people, and I'd always think, I want these people to know that I'm intelligent, you know, and which generally, when that's your motivating factor, you come off as the opposite. And then I realized at some point, I forget who it was. It may have been, it was a comedian. I can't remember who it was. But yeah, he said one time, he said, you don't want to be the smartest guy in the room, because then everybody wants to challenge you. He said, and so I realized it's better to be the funniest guy in the room, because then you're entertaining people. And I kind of had that transformation where I realized, like, I don't need to be teaching people all the time, you know. Instead, I can just enjoy people and enjoy the conversation. And if you know something that everybody else in the room doesn't, it's probably better just to keep it to yourself sometimes, you know.
Yeah, totally. And because I agree with that lesson so much, that no one likes when someone comes in with all the, you know, I love learning from people, you know, I really do. There's a lot of people that I get a lot from, but it's no one. I feel like it's an undesirable trait to be the person descending upon the room to tell them everything and teach them everything. you don't want to be the dumbest person in the room. I'd rather be like the maybe top 25%, so you can feel good about yourself, but actually like look up to other people and learn from them. No, I'm just kidding, guys.
Norm Macdonald, that's who said it. Norm Macdonald, the comedian. Norm, he was the one that said, yeah, you don't want to be the smartest guy in the room. It's better to be the funny guy in the room. Yeah, and Dougie, I see that. If you want people to think you're intelligent, you can just talk science. But the problem is that a lot of people maybe they're not interested. So you think you're the most intelligent person in the room, and you quite likely are, but you're also the most boring person in the room. And it's not just science.
Depending on the room.
I mean, I could go, into a room and start talking about Socrates and, not realize like, oh my God, I'm putting these people to sleep, So.
Trout, maybe that's what we're doing with this. Have you thought about that?
Probably lecturing everyone on.
But that's something we came into this, and it was one of our biggest points. Is like, and we'd said that a bunch. Is like, Trouty, and you would say to me like, as long as we don't want to come off as like trying to sound smart. As long as we're interested, we don't want to come off that way. Because I definitely don't feel that way about myself. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned in my life, is that I got a lot to learn about a lot of shit,
Yeah. So let's move on to a couple other characters. I don't think we can touch on all of the characters that we wanted to, because we are running short on time. But one that I wanted to talk about was Tate, the sheriff. And I kind of touched on how he doesn't seem to do his job very well, like he with the dog, he was like, Atticus, here, take the gun, shoot it. And then again at the jailhouse scene, and they told him that they had sent him on a snipe hunt, which for those of you who aren't familiar, a snipe hunt is sort of like a wild goose chase. Like there is no snipe, there is no goose. You're just going off you're sending him on a false errand. But I wonder how much, because remember, he was the one that came to Atticus's yard and had said, hey, and he was trying to talk some sense into him, like, just let it be, So clearly he doesn't have much respect for the system of justice in the county, despite being the law enforcement officer there. But I kind of wonder, like, did he know something was going down and just sort of decided, like, I'm going to go ahead and let what happens happen?
Rather than being fooled into the goose chase.
I don't think they fooled him. Like, oh, there's a crime going on the other side of the county. I really do believe that he knew what was happening, and that's why he came to the house. I mean, if he was clueless, he wouldn't have come to the house to try to talk Atticus into letting things go.
So is he just really like deeply burying his head in the sand?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's weird. For whatever reason, Tate has sort of flew under the radar for me as a character, and that would almost support that. Like, he almost seems like he's there, but he's not there in a way.
Well,
he doesn't have that.
He clearly has the prejudices that everyone else in the town does, because when he's testifying, Atticus asks him, well, what proof did you have that Tom Robinson did it? He said, well, they told me he did, and so I arrested him.
Inherently trust them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I don't mean to get off topic, but Dougie just said before that Harper Lee's mother's maiden name was Cunningham. That's crazy. That's probably not a coincidence. That's very interesting.
And her nickname was Finch. So maybe there's
a little
self-aggrandizing there in between.
Oh, you got to do it. You got to do it. You went to the lengths of writing a novel. Yeah, you can do a little bit of that. I love it.
But he also said, "Oh, sorry."
No, you go. Sorry.
Well, Dougie also here just a moment ago said, "Does he want to keep Atticus from protecting him?" Which I don't believe so. No. But I do agree that he just wanted to keep the peace, the peace, regardless of the negative consequences. But how peaceful is a lynch mob, right?
Well, is that the morphine? Is that the morphine there, right?
Sure.
Just want to keep the pain away. I just want my distractions. I just want to be complacent in all this. I want to be apathetic. That's something we haven't discussed much. Is the town's apathy. But I guess we have actually with the dog. There's a lot of like, no, you do it, Atticus. I don't want to do it. Yeah, Hectate is, I guess, he didn't stand out to me, and that's probably by design.
Right. He's very
You know what I mean.
milquetoast. But yeah, I thought the courtroom scene where he's being kind of cross-examined was incredibly telling to the type of sheriff he is. He cares less about the actual facts of the case and more about, like Dougie said, just keeping the peace at whatever costs.
Right. And that's, do you think that's something that is representative of people in society in general? Do you think that's something that goes on now? Is that a valuable trait?
Well, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I do think that there's a significant amount of apathy about all kinds of problems because, I'd say that not to minimize the struggles of Macomb County, but globally, or at least nationally where I live, there are so many problems. And it's like we said, it's like I got to get up and go to work. And what little time I have, I would rather be spending it ignoring the problems outside my door and instead, spending time with friends and trying to, and I value those things, but like how complicit am I? Am I a Hectate? Am I a Miss Maudie? I don't know. I'm certainly no Atticus Finch, that's for sure.
Well, we're probably the people who did not appear at all because we were locked inside our room streaming video games while this all happened around us.
Shameful.
I know, it's terrible. So a couple other characters here. Mr. Yule. Can't remember his first fucking name. Mr. Yule. The big, he gets on the...
Bob Yule.
Bob Yule, and he gets on the stand, and he's described in very, almost vehemently described in a disgusting way. He's like, I think he's referred to as kind of like a rooster or something. Like he's got this red face, and he's like washed himself for the first time ever, and he's almost a bit of a caricature, I think.
Sure. Yeah, no chin. Unlike us, no chin. I like that they just, it's a sort of physiognomy thing that it's like, oh yeah, I know people like that. Yeah, weak chin, weak person.
So he's, I don't know what really to say about him other than he is, well, is he humanized? Does Lee do him justice? Do people like that exist?
Yeah, I mean, is he a caricature? Or, I mean, clearly things like this have occurred in real life before. So, it's hard to say how much of it was a extreme caricature and how much of it was maybe based on people she actually knew growing up in the post, or the Reconstructionist South,
It makes me realize, and this kind of goes back to what Melissa was saying before about Lee not really giving certain viewpoints the time of day. I think this is why Dostoevsky novels are so long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I think Lee has looked at this and gone, has given certain precedents to certain perspectives and made cuts in certain places. But you could tell that if Fyodor was going to tell the same story, it's going to be 3 times as thick. Because then you might go into trying to talk about Mr. Yule and talk about what his fears are or why he's, the way he is or something like that. Because he sort of does feel a little glossed over, but I don't know if that's a weakness in this instance for the story, what matters in the story. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, and I also think that there's there are other characters. Like, do you think the Cunninghams are just as poor financially as the Yules, but perhaps they're richer in character? Now, keep in mind, Mr. Cunningham, he is part of that lynch mob that had ill intentions, but at the same time, look at the way that the county views the Yule family. Generations of just, they don't work, they don't contribute, they don't care about anyone but themselves, and they all just sort of turn a blind eye to it. Whereas the Cunninghams have this sort of sense of pride. And so I think that in some ways, Bob Yule is this crazy caricature and just this idea of the lower class that maybe she has. But on the other hand, she does have a lot of respect for the hardworking people. This is during the Great Depression, and so like there are these people that struggle, but she still has this great admiration for them in the way that she writes these characters.
That's a really good distinction between the Cunninghams and the Yules, and it's illustrated early. Now I think about it in the kids, because you get to see a kid from both families, right?
Yeah, yeah,
and
the Cunningham
Yule
kid,
one's really messed up.
he's the one that turns down the quarter, because he knows he can't pay her back, even though he could go, have a delicious lunch on the teacher and then never pay her back. But instead he turns it down, and then right after that you get that scene with the young Yule boy who cusses her and she puts her to tears. An adult woman is crying over the words of a 6-year-old boy. So yeah, I think that, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's that scene that sort of characterizes the two families.
Yeah. Trout, I feel like we're probably starting to run out of time here.
Yeah.
We might open stuff up to chat, I would say, if that's all right with you. I think, we haven't really gone into the trial yet, but I think that is something we can really delve into more next time, which will be our final for this book. Do you think that's a good idea?
Yes, I think that the next little bit is going to be the remainder of the book. We'll meet one more time and talk about sort of the conclusion, and then we can talk about it as a whole. But I was talking to you. I'm really looking forward to this movie.
Yeah,
the Gregory Peck film is just fantastic. It's really one of the best movies that I've ever seen. Which is part of the reason I picked this book.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's great to have a companion, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. I'd never read the book, and I've still not seen the movie. We're going to watch it after the next stream, right, in the Discord?
Yes, yeah. And that's one thing that we wanted to talk to you folks about. We can do it after the show. I'm fine with that. It's a little bit late for me after the show, but I'm fine with staying up and watching the movie. Or we can try to do it that next weekend, or whatever works for people. And we can talk about it in the Discord. We don't have to come up with a for sure time right now. But that's kind of where we're at. Is we got one more episode that we'll focus on To Kill a Mockingbird, and then we'll watch the movie, and that'll be sort of our reward for getting through our first book.
Yeah. Melissa Kim's closer to my time zone, so that would work. I guess we could hold a poll. That's probably the most democratic way to do it, right? We could hold a poll in the Discord for maybe a couple of different times or whatever, just to see what people want to do. And we'll go with the mob. So is there anything, Chad, are there any other characters or ideas that have been in your head about this that you'd like to share? Dougie says here, it was based on an event when she was 10. Yeah. We sort of, in the first episode of this, which if you'd like to catch up, it's on our YouTube. I'll put a link in the Discord if you're interested in that. We sort of talked a little bit more about Harper Lee and her background.
Yeah,
Black says, all this humanization talk, I'd like to remind everyone there's some dense motherfuckers out there. You take this one, Trout.
Well, yeah, I think you're right, Blacks, and who knows, maybe some of us qualify for that title, but that's the point, right? Is that the dense people are just as capable of doing heroic things as they are of doing monstrous things, just like all of us. But the thing that stood out to me here is, Dougie, you said, is it ignoring the problems, or do people have different responsibilities? I have a baby and a wife. If I abandon them to do activism, I'd be a neglectful father. And in many ways, I think that would be contributing to a worse world more than, your activism would be contributing to a better world. I think sometimes we have to recognize our sphere of influence. And it's like, my sphere of influence is the people around me, and my job isn't necessarily to educate them, but it is to try to treat people with kindness and to try to do my best. And when you have those fights that you're going to lose, you have to be like Atticus. And that's one theme that I really love is he's like, I know I'm losing this. I know I'm going to lose it, but I have to take a stand. And that when you have those moral stands, take a stand, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Blacks follows up here with dense people usually are better overall. They're dumb, but it makes them more honest than other people. Huh? Do you think so? What about dense people who think they're smart, like Trout and me? What about that? What about that? Smart people can scheme, dense people. Yeah. But I think as well, like, well, I'm thinking a lot of things at once, but I think it depends what sort of ideals they're following then, you know? And I guess that kind of leads it. Maybe it's not even about being dense though. Like maybe it is more about what Dougie and Trout have been talking about people being too busy in the home, too busy trying to maintain a family, too busy with work, too busy trying to survive. Maybe it is a combination of the two. I'm not sure. The world is a big, complex place. And I think we live in this world now where we are inundated with the troubles of the world. I mean, it's hard enough in Macomb County, I'm sure, for some people to, you know, you see how hard it is for someone to do what they think is the right thing in Macomb County. And that's a microcosm of what we get now. So, I mean, it's overwhelming. What do you do? Like I often see that as well. Like someone's out there saving the whales. It's like, well, what are you doing about the forests, mate? Like
you're neglecting,
you know, and like, I'm joking. I don't actually think that, but there's always something that's being neglected, right?
Yeah. And, you know, I think we would all agree that a mob of dense people is a dangerous thing, but you know what's more dangerous? A mob of dense people led by a smart person. That's what I think you got to worry about. So yeah, Blacks, you're right. Smart people scheme. Dense people need effort. But if you got that smart guy leading a bunch of dense people, oof, watch out.
Struggling to meet your basic needs makes complacency. Yeah. And this is in the Depression era as well. So, and we see it, right? We see people struggling. And no one seems to be out and out rich. Like the Attica, you know, the Finch family are doing fine. Like they would be considered better off, it seems, than most people in town. But it's not like they're living this luxury life. So I think there's a lot of people struggling in that town. That makes sense.
There was one scene. I want to see if I can find it. So they have the Methodists and the Baptists in town, right? And that seems to be
doing the football match
theme. Yeah, the football match, but also there's sort of a theological difference in the way they worship and believe. And there was that scene, I'm trying to find it. It was right before they went to the courthouse when all the folks were headed there.
All the towns passing through and they see some people they haven't seen in a while.
Yeah, and Miss Maudie was standing outside. I want to see if I can find it.
But
they used the scripture.
While you look for that, I'll just say thank you for the follow, Kiki Tofu, and thank you for the follow earlier, Cranberry Pudding. Welcome in.
And Dinge. Thank you so much for the follow if you're still around. Dinge.
Oh, Dinge, thank you for the follow. I didn't even see that. Hello.
The driver of the wagon slowed down his mules, and a shrill-voiced woman called out. Now, this is to Miss Maudie with her beautiful flowers. She says, "He that cometh in vanity departeth in darkness." And without missing a beat, Miss Maudie says, "A merry heart maketh a cheerful countenance." And that, I think, is something that we didn't really get into, and we don't really have time to get into it. But this idea that people are using, you know, scripture or using sacred texts for nefarious purposes.
Classic strat.
Mm-hmm. So I just thought that was interesting, and it just popped into my head. I almost wish we had talked about that because I thought it was really interesting.
Well, we might have time. I'm thinking next week because there's a little bit less in terms of actual words to read and talk about next week. Not that there's still quite a bit. That might be a good chance for us to go back upon anything we might feel is throughout the whole book that might be worth talking about. And same for you guys in chat. Anything you think overall that maybe was glossed over. Because we're going overtime today, guys.
Yeah, so we can either hit it in the Discord or in next week's or in 2 weeks from now we'll have another episode. Discord.
Totally. Put those thoughts in the spoiler chat. I've really enjoyed some of the stuff I've read in there, and it's a good chance to flesh out some of the ideas that have been circulating through my own mind.
Kiki, you are not spoiling anything. We're so happy to have you. But yeah, feel free to listen in, or if you want to join in 2 weeks from now, because the conversation's over. We're done.
Yep, we're done. We're out of here.
Last couple things, just some housekeeping stuff. Once again, if you're not in the Discord, please join the Discord, which, do I have? I don't think I have anything set up, darn it. I'll set that up, but yeah, join the Discord. We're having some really good conversations in there. This weekend, I want to do another movie night, maybe Friday, maybe Saturday. I haven't really figured it out, but I'd love to do another movie night with you folks. Those are always fun. Great. And then yeah, just look forward to 2 weeks from now. We'll finish this book up, and we'll kind of maybe do a little sneak peek of the next book that we're looking at doing, and then we're going to schedule that movie, the classic To Kill a Mockingbird film, which is just fantastic.
Looking forward to it. Chat, thank you so much for joining us. Trouty.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. No, thank you for joining me with this, and thank you all, chat, for hanging out. We're going to call it a night. I'm exhausted, but we'll see you in 2 weeks, all right?
Yeah, let's keep the discussion going in the Discord, guys.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Have a good night, folks. See ya.
Bye, guys. Love you all. See ya, Melissa, Dougie, Kiki, Blacks, everyone.